So good morning, everybody, and welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Just to make sure you're in the right place, this is the Fundraising Through Change, How to Effectively and Empathetically Fundraise Now. It's a webinar being hosted by WIN. So if you didn't sign up for that, you might want to check your Zoom schedule, but either way, please stay with us. It will be a fascinating conversation this morning with some very incredible people. I'll be your host. My name is Bekah Salwasser. I'm the Executive Director of the Red Sox Foundation. And in partnership with the incredible Executive Director of the Women's Foundation of Boston, Christina Gordon, we conceived of this idea of WIN a few years ago as a space for female executive directors, female leaders of nonprofits to connect in a safe space where they can learn, collaborate, and connect. And that's just what we'll be doing here this morning. So thank you for joining us. Before we get in, I just want to cover a few pieces of housekeeping. For the 200 folks that are joining us this morning, we wanted to let you know that the event will be recorded and will be available for review after the event. We'll put that on the WIN YouTube channel and be sharing that link after this morning. During the conversation, you're going to be seeing the faces of our three panelists and myself. You'll be able to ask questions to the panelists directly through the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Feel free to ask specific questions to each panelist and they will do their best to get back to you. If they can't, we'll try to get to those questions at the end of the conversation during our Q&A panel. We will also be having a raffle after the Q&A for two amazing VIP gift bags. Those items include things like wine, a certificate for a facial, custom-made face mask, and more. So please stick around for that raffle at the end. You have to be present on the Zoom to win, so make sure you're here. Finally, we'll end with a brief survey where we ask all the participants to answer the 4 questions. It's super quick, 30 seconds. This really allows us to help build out what the next event will look like. Everything we do here is based on your feedback because we want to make sure that this is the most helpful hour of your day. So with all that done, let's get started. Last June, if you were here with us, we took all the results from that survey and we learned that racial equity and social justice in partnership with fundraising were the 2 most kind of interesting conversations for you all, the topics that you all wanted to hear about. And we thought, how can we really approach that conversation given that they're 2 separate spaces really? And I think today we came up with a really interesting kind of cross collaboration between the panelists that we have here this morning. And that's Sara Conahan from New Profit, that's Paul Francisco from State Street, and Charmane Higgins from Trinity Boston Connects. I've asked them each to do their own bios because no one knows them better than themselves. And so with that, I'd like to turn over to Sara to do a 1 to 2 minute intro of herself, and then Paul, and then Charmane. So Sara.
Great, thanks, Bekah. I'm thrilled to be here today. Thank you, Bekah, for asking me, and thank you, WIN. Nice to be here with Charmane and Paul. A little bit about myself. I am a Boston local, so I grew up in the Boston area. I have spent my career in the nonprofit sector in large part. I had an opportunity to start my career at Georgetown University, and then I did some political fundraising. And then I came back to Boston, back to family, and I spent many years at Boston Children's Hospital. And then I went over to Suffolk Construction, where I had the good fortune of interacting and intersecting with Bekah. Did some corporate philanthropy and personal philanthropy with the owner. And then I moved over to New Profit, and I've been at New Profit for 3 years as managing director. And we're a venture philanthropy fund. I'll get into a little more specifics later. But we are in the midst of raising $100 million right now for Proximate Capital. So this conversation is very timely. I'm thrilled to be here. And I would say, like, throughout my career, I've had the good fortune of being around amazing women, and this is no different. So I appreciate being in community with you all today and look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Sara. Paul?
Good morning, everyone. Bekah, thanks for having me. Thank you, WIN, as well, for having me, and great to be here with Charmane and you, Sara, as well. Paul Francisco, I'm the Global Chief Diversity Officer and Head of Workforce Development Programs at State Street. And while I'm not a Boston native, I've been in Boston long enough to call myself a Bostonian, so over 30 years, and you know, have really come to love and appreciate the city and the opportunities in the city. We have a long way to go, but hopeful that change is coming. And my day, you know, obviously job is to sort of lead all our strategy efforts around inclusion and diversity and making State Street a more inclusive workplace. But my night jobs, one, I'm the co-leader of the men's student group, which some of you may have heard. And that is a network of men of color that come together for purposes of not only networking, but soul replenishing, sort of creating our own space and driving change in our own communities through our leadership. But also, and more recently, Bekah and I have had the opportunity to be the co-founders along with 17 others of the new Commonwealth Racial Equity and Social Justice Fund. And so I'll be talking a little bit about that a little bit later, an exciting new funding vehicle that we launched to support Black and Brown led not-for-profit. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Paul. And last but not least, Charmane.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Bekah and Christina, for the invitation. And it's wonderful to be on the panel with both Paul and Sara. My name is Charmane Higgins, and I'm the new Executive Director of Trinity Boston Connects. Prior to that, I served as the Executive Director of Strive Boston, which is in Codman Square, and that's a social justice workforce development organization. I am a proud product of the Boston Public School System. I also serve as an adjunct faculty member at Boston College School of Social Work, and for the last 10 years have been teaching at the Institute for Nonprofit Practice, and I'm just really happy to be here with all of you.
Thank you so much, Charmane. So we're going to get right into questions, and this is the only question that I'm going to have each one of our panelists answer. We're going to try to fly through because I know the folks out there have a ton of questions for you all. So this first one, again, I'm going to have all of you answer, and there's really no right answer here. I just want to know how you're doing. It is an incredibly heavy time in our country for so many reasons in our community. How are you continuing to find inspiration and continuing just to move forward every single day? So Paul, let's start with you.
I'm troubled. I am, I said it yesterday in another conference I had. I think for the work that we all do, and for the work that I do specifically, it's the best of times, but it's also the worst of times. It's the best of times because finally, I think we're coming to a point as a country in a society where we are sort of reckoning and we are thinking about systemically what needs to change and how it needs to change. And we're having the conversations that we should have been having years ago. And so from that perspective, I find myself incredibly busy, but incredibly driven to make change. It's the worst of times because as we all know, I think mentally, emotionally, it's a heavy time for many of us. For me, as a man of color, as a Black man and Afro-Latino, it's been very emotional for the past 6 months or so, and it's made me want to do everything and whatever I possibly can to change the condition. And there are days where the work seems insurmountable, and then there are days that you feel full of hope and full of spunk, and yes, we can do this type of thing. But overall, I think we're just trying to manage. I'm trying to manage, and I'm trying to do the best I can for my community, but hopeful that ultimately change is going to come, and I do truly believe that. But it will take all of us to truly do that. So that's how I'm feeling.
Yeah, no, absolutely, totally agree. Charmane, let's hear from you.
I think like Paul, I am both frustrated, I'm wearied, and I have this sort of, I call it my righteous rage to actually affect change. I have a brother. I'm the godmother to Black boys, and so sometimes I'm just plain frightened. I'm frightened for their safety. And yet, I try to always, I have this expression, I try to drop my anchor in hope, because otherwise we have to have hope. We have to maintain a fierce determination that we can bring change and change can come about. But there are days where the trauma and the anxiety of this time that we're in does become overwhelming. And when that happens, I pray. I go out into my garden and pull weeds and look at my tomatoes, and I go bike riding. And that's how I restore myself, because I know that with this level of hard work, we have to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves to the best of our abilities.
Absolutely. I love that. I wrote, drop my anchor and hope down. Love that phrase. Sarah, you're up next.
Thank you, Paul and Charmane. I agree. It's incredibly complex and confusing times. I think it's feeling all the feels on any given day. I think, for me personally, this has been trying to do the right next thing, both personally and professionally, and stay in the moment. There's so much happening. And Charmane, I loved how you said getting outside in your garden. I mean, I think there are little things that I've been trying to pull into my daily practice to stay centered. I feel incredibly grateful to be at New Profit doing the work we're doing. It's incredibly humbling, and focusing on the social entrepreneurs that we are working with and looking to raise money for and funding is a daily reminder of the hope and of the opportunity out there. And so I just trying to stay focused there is a daily commitment. And on a personal level, also working on my own equity practice, so really, that is a daily practice that I'm personally on. So we're doing that both at New Profit and doing that personally as well.
Perfect, Sarah. And I wrote down, do the next right thing, partly because if anybody has young kids, it's a song in Frozen 2, and I hear it every night. So let's get right into the questions. Charmane, we're gonna start with you. I'd love to know, kind of, given the times, how has that shifted your priorities and your own professional work at Trinity Boston Connects? What are you all hyper-focused on right now?
That's a great question, Bekah. And just for those in the audience, our mission at Trinity Boston Connects is that we connect people, programs, and practices to unlock opportunities and change the odds for young people of color. And we do that through the integration of what we call our 3 essential community practices: racial equity, restorative justice, and trauma-informed care. And in truth, Bekah, this is what TBC, this moment or movement, is what TBC is built for and was founded for. We center our work really around providing healing connections, and we have been really fortunate in that we have received funding, out of the blue funding, from some of our private donors above and beyond what they normally give. We have been the recipient of the City of Boston's Resiliency Fund. We receive less funding from corporations. It's mainly the traditional foundations, et cetera, and our private donors. What we have found is that because our work centers around those 3 essential community practices, again, racial equity, restorative justice, and trauma-informed care, that in some instances, funders are reaching out to us and saying, how can we help? What do you need? They have, early on during the pandemic, we had some funders actually send us their gifts way ahead of schedule. And so we're really seeing, we're really been successful in our grant applications and grant funding right now. And that's because folks realize that, again, this is what our organization, this is what our team is built for. And we've been really fortunate, and it's to what Paul said, it's both the best of times, because there's a hyper focus on racial equity and racial justice, And at the same time, it's the worst of times because there's so much trauma involved in all of that. So yeah, that's what I would say.
And one of the things I wrote down is moment versus movement, which is a clear Hamilton reference, which is amazing. But you're very right. Like this is a very unique time right now. And you all have done a phenomenal job of making sure that your value is still a value add to so many organizations. So that's great to hear. Sara, I'd love to get a little bit into your brain around nonprofits that might not be focused on some of this social justice, racial equity work. Given that they're not in that space and recognizing that so much of funding priorities are in that space, do you think that nonprofits should shift what they're doing or even their mission to better align with where we're seeing some of the funding going?
Sure. I think I would argue that all of the work or most of the work that we're all doing can fall under the umbrella of racial justice and social equity. And so I think one thing is a really clear narrative. And so it may mean slightly shifting materials or shifting, your external face on your website. But I do think that a lot of the work that we're all doing right now can be a case for the larger movement and this moment in time. And I think that to Charmane's point, funders, those that have historically funded you want to continue to fund you. People fund people. And so while we're in this incredible moment in history, I do think that there's also, some of the basics that we, to remember about, relying on our board, relying on connections, and that it may mean slightly tweaking messaging or materials, but that it's part of this movement.
That's such a great point. Paul, speaking of money, as Sara just mentioned, it's still there in terms of funders wanting to fund great organizations and mainly people. Where is the money that you're seeing? Is it with individuals, private donors? Is it with corporations, foundations, or grants? Do you have any sense of where nonprofits should be looking first and foremost?
Well, I think nonprofits should be looking everywhere and anywhere. And Charmaine pointed to the fact that it's, right now at this moment, private funders, whether it's private foundations, corporate foundations, and other, they're looking to sort of say, how do we amplify the impact? How do we continue to support and sustain those organizations who are doing the work? And to Sara's point, it's not about changing your mission, it's sort of changing the narrative of your mission around how does it serve, the racial inequities or the social justice issues, because I dare to say that most of you, regardless of the not-for-profit that you lead, probably are doing the work, right? Whether it's health inequities, whether it's direct services, whether it is workforce development programs, whether it's educational focus, whatever the case, you can make an argument that those are all issues that drive equity and social justice for underserved communities. So I think that the money is everywhere. I think a lot you have, I'll speak from our corporate foundation perspective, and I am not a representative of our corporate foundation, but just in general, I see these type of foundations shifting their focus or rethinking how their investments and their grants will go to support organizations who are doing this work. I see a lot of private donors redoubling their efforts, increasing their giving, and being more mindful and conscious that their dollars go to those organizations doing the work. And I see foundations, Bekah talked about proximate giving, and they're focused on saying, we want to make sure that we get the dollars to the people on the ground who are making a difference. So how do we do that? So, I think this is, again, the best of times in terms of, seizing the opportunity. I think there's a question in the chat about how do we make this sustainable beyond 2020, right? What's going to happen in 2021? Are those dollars going to become softer or not? And I think that, we all sort of grappling with that and sort of trying to figure out, what's beyond 2020. But we need to seize the moment now in terms of the ability and the desire of funders everywhere tackle this issue, you know, and to make it a more sustainable approach to funding. And I think 2021 will have its own challenges, but I don't think the focus is going away anytime soon. So from that perspective, I think that we need to continue to focus on, you know, the work that we're doing and how the work that we're doing aligns to what these funders are looking to support.
Absolutely. And Charmane, you touched on this earlier, as Paul actually referenced, that you're seeing foundations and private donors be the kind of prominent source of funding for your organization. I'm curious though, within that kind of bucket of foundations, is that more local, smaller private family foundations, or is that larger national foundations? And even with your private donors, are those new, or are those donors that you've cultivated and stewarded over the years? And maybe that kind of detail could be helpful for our listeners.
Sure. So we receive most of our funding from local foundations, local private foundations. We all know the big name ones. And we have seen and continue to see our committed, faithful supporters continue that, their contributions to us. And literally they are either giving what they normally give, but giving it earlier, or they're giving more than what they normally give. And it's been a tremendous help for us because I didn't explain earlier, so the work, how we do the work is really based on some direct service work we do, working with young people through we have a running program, we have a full year academic program and youth leadership program. We have a counseling center that works with youth workers who then in turn work with our young people. And we also have a consulting arm, our organizational equity practice, that works with organizations around our 3 essential community practices. And so it's because of the array of services we offer, funders, both private, both institutional, can really pick which bucket they want to invest in, and that's been tremendously helpful for us. And the other thing that I'd like to just mention is how grateful I am to funders who have said to us, here is money for you to take care of your staff. And so we have been able to use some unrestricted dollars to institute. In the summertime, we instituted Wellness Wednesdays, where we close the office because we're all working from home, to allow folks an opportunity to reset. We did summer Fridays closing at 2 o'clock, and we've used some of that unrestricted dollars to provide COVID stipends to our colleagues because electricity bills are going up, water bills are going up, folks need hotspots and boosters, and so it's because of the generosity of our funders that we're able to do the good work that we're doing and also keep an eye on our colleagues and their care and their well-being.
Right, and one thing I'm sure that you can attest to is money doesn't just always come in and fall in your lap. You all obviously, as you said, are continuing to provide services. You've probably, if you're anything like our organization, the Red Sox Foundation, we have been very intentional about maintaining correspondence and communication and making sure that our donors understand that we have continued our services despite our remote situation. And so maybe just speaking just a tad to the effort that your development team or you have put in to making sure that there's that communication back and forth with your donors to make sure that they are informed as to what you're doing.
Absolutely. I have the best development team in all of creation, led by Sheila Peterson. And we have absolutely been in constant communication with our funders through our newsletter, our monthly newsletter. A lot of our funders sit on our board, which is fantastic. And so having regular conversations with our board, we can't underestimate the importance of social media right now. And so particularly with our TEAP program, which is a program for our young people, the academic youth leadership program. I mean, having young people on your staff at this point, so important because they are tweeting, Instagram, TikTok. I just learned about TikTok. I didn't even know about that. And so it's just, we're doing all that we can to stay engaged and connected with funders, with our board, with our young people, because we need each other right now.
That's exactly right. So Sara, I'd love to hear a little bit more about New Profit. I'm sure most folks that are here have heard of it, but might not be able to explain articulately exactly what New Profit does. So would you share a little bit about New Profit and then get into really how to access capital, whether through donor advised funds, or what recommendations you would have for nonprofits as they think about accessing capital?
Sure, thanks, Bekah. So New Profit is a Boston-based venture philanthropy firm. So we are an organization for social entrepreneurs, created by social entrepreneurs. And we take a lot of the venture capital mindset and principles and apply it to the nonprofit space. So we raise capital. So that's my job as investor relations, is to raise the dollars. And we look for social entrepreneurs that are ready to scale. And we look across the country, and we're issue agnostic. So we look for incredible leadership, and we provide them with a grant of, we have 2 different levels of grants. But the main thing that we do is we provide unrestricted capital. And Charmane spoke to this, but the importance of, we trust that the leaders we're identifying know what's best for the organization, and we want to give them the runway to be able to use the funding in the way that they see fit. We also provide them with a deal partner. So a colleague from the New Profit team sits on their board and really navigates whatever it is that they are coming up against throughout the course of the 4-year grant cycle with them in deep partnership. And we're in it from a financial fiscal responsibility perspective, board management, staff, any of the issues that may come up. And then we provide them with a number of wraparound services. So really the capacity building. So as you think of, we have a policy arm based out of Washington, D.C. So as we're thinking about policy and leveraging government dollars, and I think, some of our social entrepreneurs, while obviously the funding and the money is great, the wraparound services as far as the capacity support is what's valuable. And we bring our social entrepreneurs together on a regular basis so that they can learn from one another. Well, that looks a little bit different in this moment in time, but at a very high level, that's our model. And as far as accessing capital, I think Paul spoke to this, but the amount of capital that's flooded the market in the last 6 to 7 months is incredible. So, near over 6 billion of new money that's been named, both from foundations, corporations, and individual philanthropists. I think, as we think about beyond 2020, I think a lot of those entities have not yet decided how to deploy that capital. So while it's been named, it has not yet been decided where it will go, which is good for all of us, I think, as we think about our messaging and how we're trying to navigate that capital. I know that, Fidelity Donor Advised Fund has year to date given out $5 billion, which makes them the largest nonprofit in the country. And that's about a 30% increase year to date from where they were last year. And that information, you can access that on their website. And I think as far as accessing capital, fundraising is relationship based. And so, when we think about fundraising at New Profit, it is really like deeply personal and relationship based. Now, our model is such that we don't have thousands and thousands of donors. So I totally appreciate Charmane's the social media and taking advantage. I think, when you were asking Bekah about how have you connected with donors, early on, we just did a general wellness check on all of our donors. So literally just picking up the phone and connecting and asking how people were doing. And I have found, just that kind of human connection is what I think we're all craving right now, is to be in community with one another and to connect with one another. And so that's been a really important piece of our past 6 to 7 months, is staying connected, and also, making sure that we're thinking about how do we leverage our board members, how do they help us connect to new capital, but really creating a community and a place where we can make sense of what's happening right now. We're finding also that, our donors and prospective donors are really looking for some sense making, like what is happening, and how is this impacting my philanthropy, and how can we collectively be together in a safe place to wrestle with some of these really important questions.
That is a perfect segue into my next question, which is to Paul about the new Commonwealth Fund, which he mentioned in his bio. Him and I had the good fortune of being part of the leadership that established the new Commonwealth Racial Equity and Social Justice Fund. So Paul, I'll ask you though to speak a little bit more about its conception, its focus, and timing, eligibility, all the pieces, because I'm sure many folks out there that are listening have heard whispers about it, and I've actually received a bunch of phone calls about it. So I think just sharing information about it will be very helpful.
Sure. You know, the new Commonwealth Fund, as is being called now, you know, came about because there were a few of us, as Bekah mentioned, that decided that as corporate leaders, we need to do something. We need to activate our influence, our networks, and we needed to challenge our corporations to think about this issue in a different way or in an amplified way. And so the 19 of us that came together, all from mostly corporate and so non-for-profit leadership, Black and brown leaders, decided that we wanted to create something, a funding vehicle that would address the needs of Black and brown-led organizations. And the reason why is because, as we all know, these are the nonprofits that get the less funding out of traditional funding mechanisms, right? We get 2% on average of all philanthropic giving, and we just thought, hey, that's inequity right there. That shouldn't happen, and so they clearly there is a funding bias that goes to, you know, white-led non-for-profits, and that's because of what Sara just mentioned. You know, it's about relationships, and it's about networks, and you know, perhaps you know, there is a dearth of relationships or a dearth of trust, really, when it comes to Black and brown leadership and leading this. But looking at somebody like Charmane, I don't know why there would be a lack of trust in terms of how these leaders are activating, you know, their organizations to create impact. So anyway, we came together. We wanted to do something. We are not, you know, corporate philanthropy folks for the most part. We are not, you know, not-for-profit folks for the most part. But we knew that we had a way in which to get our organizations to support the effort. And so we set out to raise about $20 million initially to say, what can we do? And, you know, happy to say that we had that commitment almost right away from all our organizations. And then we said, well, should we stop at $20 million? Should we go for $100 million, which is what the goal is for the next 5 years? And so we launched in June. We are in the process of establishing what the strategy should be. We are actively listening to community leaders and others who are on the ground doing this work, because we want them to inform the strategy, and we want to make sure that we are directing our efforts into the right hands and into the right strategies. We have a 4-pillar approach to the work around police and justice reform, around tackling healthcare inequities, around economic development and empowerment, and around youth education, empowerment, and civic engagement. So, you know, we feel that those 4 buckets of work and pillars encompass the majority of the not-for-profits that are Black and brown led, that are out there doing the work. And so we wanted to be intentional with that, and we wanted to make sure that the funding was done as quickly and swiftly as possible. We wanted to also take an approach of not necessarily doing it the traditional way in which we are going to have people jump through hoops in terms of receiving the funding, but rather understanding where the funding can go and make the most impact right away, create capacity. You know, one of the exciting things that's come about the work is, you know, we understand that not-for-profits, the life cycle of not-for-profits are such that, you know, at some point, some not-for-profits may be in need of technical assistance, right? How do we grow? How do we, you know, how do we change our strategy? So part of our offering, similar to what Sara's mentioning, will come with some technical assistance support, and that will go along with the grants. Where we are at the moment is we are determining, we're still very much in fundraising mode. So, we are trying to go after funders, both corporations, private, public foundations, et cetera, and other private foundations to take a look at what we're doing, to try to get behind the effort. Again, we have phase one is we are as a donor advised fund under the Boston Foundation. But phase two is really to create a standalone 501c3 organization that will be one of the largest Black-led foundations, if you think about it. And the goal is to, again, focus on not only Black and Brown-led organizations, because the truth is there are organizations that are doing some really great work that are not Black and Brown-led, but they are serving our communities, and we should also take a look at those. The one thing I would say is, we are looking at, for example, the diversity of your board, the diversity of your staff, and how, so because while being in our communities and serving our communities is a great thing, who's leading those efforts, the strategy, who is giving you input around, what you should focus on, how you need to handle and manage these communities, and how do you need to show up within our community. So we think that's important, and having that diversity, not only in your leadership, but in your staff and your board, I think is really critically important. So we're really excited about the fund. We are looking to potentially start, Q1, making some grants. We are talking about other type of grants that we can get out quicker in the meantime, along those four pillars. We are setting up a website, so I wish I could share with you our new and exciting website. It's almost completed, and you'll be able to get more information. But for now, you can go to the Boston Foundation and just search for the New Commonwealth Fund and get some more information there.
Great, thank you, Paul. And
Bekah, anything that I left out?
No, I think that was fantastic. Okay. I did get a question on the Q&A function, which was a great question. Is the funding available to international nonprofits working in Black and Brown communities outside of the US? And unfortunately, it is not. The New Commonwealth Fund is focused specifically in the Commonwealth. And so while we will be supporting Yes Boston, we really are going to be intentional about spreading those resources across the entirety of Massachusetts. And so it's really only available within the Commonwealth. That was a question that just came in. So.
Yeah, it is the phase one, we're obviously focused on the Commonwealth and the 350 towns, or 351 towns in the Commonwealth. And, but we do hope that this model is actually going to be replicated across, at least for now, the U.S. We actually have had inquiries and conversations from other cities that are looking at it and saying, "Wow, this is really neat." We are. I see another question talking about we working with NEBIP, and we are. Bekah is actually part of what we're trying to do and activate some of her knowledge and network. So we are working with NEBIP. And again, for now, the focus is on the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Perfect. Thank you, Paul. And continue to have those questions come in. All of our panelists are looking at those. I'm looking at those. We'll get to some of them. What I wanted to do now is shift to some questions that came in before the event, after registration opened. So we had some folks before this event send in some questions they wanted you all to answer. We'll try to get through all of those and then get to the questions that are coming in through the Q&A box, which I'm looking at right now. So first question, and again, this can go to any panelist, whoever wants to chime in to answer. We'll try to get one person to answer each one so we can get through all the questions. First one is about social media. We touched upon this a little bit earlier, maybe leveraging some younger employees to do a bit. Any recommendations for how nonprofits can leverage social media during this time to maximize fundraising efforts?
I'll answer that question. I think it's important that you first, as nonprofit leaders, figure out how do your donors, how do your funders, how do your constituencies like to receive information. Some may be the traditional newsletters, so always want to make sure you have a donate button at the bottom of that newsletter. Younger funders, because there are young people who are giving to nonprofits that they care deeply about. You know, they may respond more to the Twitter and the Instagram, TikTok, like I said. One thing I would really encourage is whatever you decide to do, you have to do that consistently. It can't be sort of, okay, the first quarter we send out a newsletter and then your customers, your client base, your donors don't hear from you for another three quarters. So it has to be consistent. It also has to be engaging. I think what we have found, and I have to give a plug to our colleague, Beth Chandler at YW Boston. They have a phenomenal newsletter because they also teach in that newsletter. So it's not just about reporting what the organization is doing, but are there training opportunities, webinars that you can point folks to? Are there ways that you can engage with the organization on the virtual platforms? And so it's consistency. It's making sure that you're hitting all the different platforms and doing it in a way that is engaging with all the members of your organization as well as your funders. Absolutely.
The next question is more about FY21. And it actually aligns nicely with the question that came in from Caitlin Bramley, who's listening right now. And the question is really about, what should we expect as nonprofit leaders from philanthropy in 21? 2020 was a great year for us because our donors could rally behind emergencies. But what happens in 21 when these emergencies really become a matter of course? What do you think we should be looking to see in 21?
Sure, I can, Paul, you want to go? Okay. I think some of the trends that we're seeing is, and I mentioned this earlier, is that there's been an incredible amount of new money that's been named in the market that has not yet, there's not complete decision around where that will go or how that will be deployed. So I do think that there will continue to be incredible amounts of opportunity in 2021. I think my thoughts on this tie into Charmane's comments around communication and consistency. And so I think the important piece is bringing your donor community along on the journey with you and really clearly stewarding them and communicating so that they understand where you're going. I think, enlisting them in a really authentic way. We've often found that, that our investors really, they want to be involved in the tough conversation. So they want to be in it with us. And I think creating vehicles through which they can do that is really important. So I think, as we think ahead to 2021 and beyond, like some of our core principles in the fundraising is, relationship management, really clear messaging, and really clear stewardship. And I think, we've all been incredibly nimble and adaptive the past 7 months, and that will likely be the case moving forward as well. But I think those are some of the things that are on our mind at New Profit as we think about 2021.
Perfect. And this one,
if I may, sorry, no, I was just going to say that what we call emergencies in 2020 and this sort of, one thing is the COVID pandemic. That's not going away anytime soon, unfortunately. And so from our funding priority, we can see the impact beyond 2020. I think, if I'm a non-for-profit leader, the conversations that I need to be having with my funders, it's about sustainability, and it's about, and especially with issues around racial equity and social justice, these are not issues that are going to go away in 2021. Mm-hmm. These are not issues that are going to go away by 2025. And unfortunately, these are not issues that are going to go away by 2050, unfortunately. And that's just the sad reality of things. So from a funding perspective, this needs to continue to be centered and needs to be continued a focus. Multi-year grants and sustainable grants, I think are something that we need to continue to talk to our funders about. And I don't think funders are thinking we are going to be able to hurdle. And 2020 was an anomaly, and 2021 we're back to our normal funding levels. I think that funders themselves are thinking this is here to stay, and we need to think of a new way in which to support these efforts.
Yep, totally agree. The next question is specific for small nonprofits. I know we have a bunch of organizations out there that might be one-woman shops or under 5 employees. Actually, 2 parts to this question. Any advice for small nonprofits surviving and thriving through this time, and also startups? You know, it's not necessarily the space right now for a startup necessarily to be the recipient of a ton of funding. How or what advice would you give to a small nonprofit and a startup? Don't make me choose someone, because I will. Sarah, I'm going to go to you on this one.
Sure. For small startup nonprofits, I would say one thing that I think, you know, there are so many nonprofits in the sector. I would think about key partners. So as you think about starting, like, think about your ecosystem and your key partnerships that you're creating. And I think, you know, as Paul just mentioned, I think there are so many funders now that are willing and understand the importance of multi-year commitments, and that are willing to accelerate gifts that had, you know, and make unrestricted capital investments. So I would think about your ecosystem, think about key partnerships, and think about volunteers, you know, who in your network that is, you know, committed to your mission can also be driving the work forward.
And I'll add just another note to what Sara said. I'd also suggest for the smaller nonprofits, like, don't do the tail wagging the dog. Don't start chasing after funding if that's not your sweet spot, because it's disingenuous, and 2, it just throws you off your game. So whatever you do, if you work on climate change, or, you know, working with seniors, I think Paul alluded to this earlier, you have to think about how you reframe your narrative, reframe your mission so that it fits into what's going on right now, but don't try to suddenly turn yourself inside out to chase after money. That's not a good idea.
It's always good advice. Another question that came in that I find very interesting, and something that I'm sure everyone's thought about before, is leveraging your participants' stories, but balancing that with feeling like it might be exploiting their lives and their lived experiences. So how do we balance, and the exact question is, how do we balance between sharing our young people's stories and encouraging support while making sure we're using the right lens of racial equity and social justice in sharing their stories?
Mm-hmm.
I'll take
it.
Paul, do you want to go? You could go, Paul. I'm going like,
well, I can. Yeah, no, sorry. I guess I can provide a perspective from, you know, as a board member of sitting on many not-for-profits that serve and service youth, our youth. That's always a fine balance. You know, how do you tell your story? How do you highlight your impact? Or how do you, I don't want to use even the word showcase, but how do you showcase the need in a way that is authentic, that is, that is transparent, but that it inspires people to give, right? So how do you tell the story? And there are some not-for-profits who are doing that without feeling that they're exploiting those populations. And that's why I think it's just really important, because when it comes to have representation at the top, because when it comes from a place of, this is us, this is me, this is my community, you know, I think that it lends credibility to what you're trying to do. And there's nothing wrong with our young people are great storytellers. And there's nothing wrong, I think, with them telling the story authentically, telling the story not from a deficit perspective, but from an empowering perspective, right? Showcasing not, you know, oh, look at this poor brown and black kid, but rather look at this outstanding, upstanding, you know, young person and their potential and how much more they can do, right? Or, you know, a formerly incarcerated person and their, you know, their struggle to reintegrate into society. And by the way, you know, here's the skill set. So I think there are ways in which we can tell our stories that is not exploitative and that represents authentically what our organizations are trying to do. But that's why you need to have those inputs from, you know, whether it's board members that understand how to couch that message, and or leaders that understand that there's a fine line that you need to walk so that you don't come across as, oh, look at that. That's just, sort of going for the crying effect so I can, loosen up my pocket, yet, it's coming across as kind of highly insensitive. So I guess that's my perspective, just because we had these discussions in some of the boards that I sit on.
Mm-hmm. The only additional thing I would add to what Paul just articulated so well is, I think one of the core principles also in your storytelling is trust. And so having, speaking authentically and having trust with your organizations or the organizations that you're representing. And that comes back to, what this is all about is relationships and having and building strong relationships. And, at New Profit, I was remiss not to mention this earlier, but, we have been on an equity journey for the past several years. And part of the work that we're doing right now is raising 100 million in proximate capital to support leaders that are Black and Brown and Indigenous and on the ground in the communities and most proximate to the issues, because we believe they have the solutions that we don't have line of sight into. And so, and in part of I mentioned that because part of the fundraising narrative is building trust with those organizations so that we can talk together about what the need is. And so I think, I personally believe that trust is such a core component of this work that we're doing, and that we're all coming at it from different lived experience, and that, that there's work that we're commonly aiming towards, but that it's building towards that trust with one another.
Charmane, did you want to add anything before?
No, I think Sara and Paul hit the nail on the head. Thank you.
They did, but I know you started. I want to make sure to leave you space to speak. I'm looking at the time, and we only probably have time for one more question, and there's so many great ones. Yeah. I think maybe the one I'm going to go with is just about collaboration, because I see this in my kind of vantage point as both a fundraiser and a funder, is that there are a lot of nonprofits doing similar work that may benefit to maximize outcomes by a partnership. And the question specifically is, how do you partner? Where do you start? How can you find organizations that are doing similar work? And then how do you cross collaborate? How do you collaborate? And that's really open to anyone.
I'll start. I think that the first thing that's important to do is, as an organization, one, determine what need you are fulfilling and uniquely positioned to fulfill in the community and for a particular constituency. And then think about what other needs that constituency needs. So for instance, if it's youth, and we do racial equity, but and our other two ECPs, but maybe we don't do academic tutoring or mentorship as well, but our young people are saying that that's something they crave. So then we actually have to go out and find an organization whose sweet spot is mentoring. So I think it's really getting very, very clear about what it is that you do well, and then determining, with the help of your client base, what it is that they need, and then finding those organizations that can collaborate with you.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that there's a responsibility of funders to think of that. Are there opportunities for funders to bring organizations together and say, hey, listen, we've phoned you both. You both are doing some of the same or related work. And actually, if you work together, you can increase your impact. And we did a little bit of that through the State Street Foundation, through our Boston Wins approach, right? It's a coordinated, we call it coordinated action. And, selecting 5 not-for-profits in the sort of, education pipeline, right? That we thought were complementary to each other, that we thought could support each other's work, amplify the work, and ultimately increase their capacity. And we took that approach. And when you have a funder that is a significant donor, talking to a not-for-profit leader saying, hey, I think, Charmane, you should work with, Sara on this effort. You're not necessarily going to say no. You at least want to explore the opportunity and say, okay, that might make sense. And I think that, so from a funding perspective, funders perspective, I think there's a responsibility there to also think of that approach and encourage not-for-profits to work together.
I completely agree. you know, we really try to make sure both at the Red Sox Foundation, but I think at WIN, looping this all back to now a good kind of closure, at WIN with the Women's Foundation of Boston, that's what we're hoping to do with this network, is to make sure that we can not only provide safe, comfortable spaces to have conversations, to connect, learn, and collaborate, but also to make sure that we can bring organizations and people together. And again, as I said, to maximize outcomes and efforts. And so we are still thinking through about the best way to do that, to make sure that all of you can find others in your own space, in your own network, to not only have friendships with, but to collaborate with and connect and partner with your organization's work. So with that, I'd love to announce the 2 raffle winners. I was just texted their names, Alana Hill and Leah Lindsay. You 2 are the fabulous winners of 2 VIP gift bags. We'll be reaching out for your mailing addresses after this via email, and we'll be sending you those bags shortly. I cannot say a large enough thank you to Charmane, Sara, and Paul. Thank you for your expertise, your passion, your leadership, your commitment in this space. We are all better off because of the work you're doing. So thank you so much for giving us this hour. And last but not least, all of you out there that have listened for the past 57 minutes, thank you so much for being part of this conversation. I do want to remind you that when you click leave, when you exit the Zoom, I believe a pop-up will show up and ask you to answer a 4-question survey. It'll take no more than 30 seconds, I promise. That information is going to help us inform what we will bring back to you when we reconvene in a couple months, whatever topics you want to hear from, whoever you want to hear from specifically. So please fill that out. It informs our decision making. And with that, I wish you all a wonderful rest of the week. Thank you for joining us, and be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you.
Bye.